All right, so let's have this conversation. SADC organ on politics, defense and security convened a one-day meeting in Namibia today. The summit discussed, among other issues, the political and security challenges in Eswatini. Last week, a human rights lawyer, Thulani Maseko, was assassinated at his house. There are unconfirmed reports that the SADF soldiers have been hired as mercenaries by King Mswati III. Eswatini has experienced violent protests since activists and human rights lawyers have called for political reforms in that country. For more on this, we're joined by Mlungisi Makhanya, PUDEMO President. Thank you so much, Mlungisi, for your time. How is the current situation on the ground in Eswatini since the assassination of Thulani Maseko?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your SABC viewers. The situation back at home is still extremely volatile and tense, with everyone apprehensive around the issue of security, owing to the fact that the state contracted mercenaries who are conducting random targeting of our people are still roaming our streets. The government is on record having said that it has contracted what it terms security experts. So we have been so emboldened to even give interviews to the fact that they are having a hit list. So the situation is very tense, with those who have been informed that are on the hit list being concerned about their safety, and some of them having been forced to flee the country to neighboring countries.
And, you know, when you talk about this particular hit list, there's also been something that the government has said, you know, that they're going to be investigating what happened here, and people shouldn't be jumping to conclusions to what exactly happened as far as this particular, you know, assassination is concerned. So have they kept that promise? Do you have any information that has been shared by law enforcement agencies in relation to investigations around this particular death?
Unfortunately, we have not received any information, nor are we frankly expecting any information to come from government. Maybe one must hasten to say that there's been a lot of attacks on leading figures of our mass democratic movement. Just to remind your viewers that not so long ago, the deputy secretary of one of the political parties was abducted from his home and a few hours later found murdered. There's been a lot of attacks on homes and properties of leading leaders of our struggle, and there's never been any feedback from government around investigation on those sort of attacks. So we will be surprised to then see this government giving us investigation on the latest assassination of Comrade Thulani. This government has been notorious on never bother to investigate attacks on properties and lives of activists. We still don't know to have information around what happened to the many people that were killed in June, July, and all those that were killed after that massacre.
Now, Mlungisi, I'd like us to go back also to your earlier point about this particular hit list. What more can you tell us about it? Because you're saying that people have fled the country. Are you in a position to tell us who are those who have fled the country, and who are some of those who you are saying that have been part of this particular hit list?
Well, for instance, when one talk about those who have been forced to flee the country, just to mention about but a few, our own National Organizing Secretary, Comrade Penuel Malinga, has been forced to leave the country after 3 attempts have been made on his life, including the latest one where more than 30 cartridges were found at his home after him and his family survived the attack. One of the leading human rights lawyers who's representing many of the suspects who had been recently arrested, Maxwell Nkambule, had been forced to flee the country after there was an attempt on his life. And many of us have been forced to flee the country. You would remember that my own home was bombed using military mortar bombs. So the list is long. When it comes to the list of those on the hit list, unfortunately, they did not disclose the names, but we know for a fact that most of those who are featuring on those lists are the leading activists and political party figures. that have been a constant attack.
Let's talk about, the Troika today, the SADC Troika discussing the issues of Eswatini. Do you have any information of how those discussions went?
Indeed, we are quite heartened as the people of Swaziland for the fact that Troika did honor Comrade Thulani, who had been a ceaseless campaigner for peace and dialogue in our country, who has ensured that he attacked most of these Troika meetings on the sidelines to do lobby. But also we saw from this communique that they released that they talk about the need for government to convene urgently this all-inclusive dialogue. We're a bit disappointed there because we think that you can't entrust Mswati's government, who has proven to be incapable to convene a dialogue. But I want to also say this. Ever since the president of Namibia assumed the chairpersonship of this organ on Troika, building on the foundation that had been laid by the South African president, he has shown extreme urgency and interest in attending to the issue of Eswatini, including making this very important point that when dialogue fails, war begins. And the fact that you do not have a dialogue with those you like. You actually dialogue with those you like, who don't like, and those that do not agree with you. So we are obviously disappointed that King Mswati decided to shun this important summit, opting to send the Prime Minister when he had no reason not to be in attendance to this important summit.
Very briefly then, as we wrap up our discussion, so given what came out of that meeting and, the discussions and the efforts that you say are being put in place, then do you think, in your view, that SADC is doing enough to address these particular issues in Eswatini?
Well, there is always room for improvement, but one cannot shy away from the fact that we are seeing renewed urgency from SADC, and we think, and we can only urge SADC to do a little bit more, particularly because, like I was saying earlier, that the person who powers rest with in Swaziland have a tendency of shunning all SADC summits that are significantly discussing the Swazi question. We can only urge SADC to do more, but indeed we are encouraged at what SADC seem to be doing in attending to the issue of Eswatini.
All right, Mlungisi, thank you so much for your time this evening. Appreciate it. That is Mlungisi Makhanya, PUDEMO President.